Firm Foundation Lite Unfolded is a weekly conversation that sits alongside the Monday sessions, and each Thursday I come back to what we've just opened up, sharing one or two aspects with a little bit more of a personal spin on it. So if you've listened to Monday, join me in today's conversation. Thanks for joining me again for one of these Thursday Unfolded episodes, conversations that run alongside the current Monday sessions. And just to say before we get into what I want to share today, that there are no participant guides for these sessions. They are only for the Monday sessions in this particular series. And as I mentioned last Thursday in the first Unfolded episode, these are where I get to share some of my own processing with you as a living witness to these truths, because there is nothing I share here ever on the Focus podcast that I haven't needed for myself and continue to need on a daily basis. And so it's critical that we are becoming a people who don't just have a message, but that we are becoming the very message. And just like the Apostle Paul, he didn't just preach the gospel. His whole life had been upended, and he himself was the message, a living witness, because we can't be living witnesses to something that hasn't first happened to us and in us. So today we're stepping into the second Unfolded episode, and I want to pick up on just one single word from session 2 last Monday, and that word is source. Not the ketchup variety, but the source of your life. And actually, this was the one word that was ringing like a persistent, ongoing alarm bell while I had the privilege to walk with some great friends of mine in Northern Ireland through a very intimate cross encounter last week. And we saw in the previous episode, the issue in the garden was always about where life would come from and who we would be joined to. Remember, oneness with us was always their desire to share their life with the sons. And two trees stood before humanity in that garden, and those two trees represented two sources, two completely different life forms, and therefore two completely different outcomes. One produced death, and the other produced life. And the question that stood before Adam and Eve is the one that still stands before each of us today, because we have to choose to continue living from either the source that produces death, or will we choose life, Christ himself? So today I'm going to ask you, which source are you still living from? Now, you'd automatically assume, as I did, that because you are a Christian, a believer, you may have prayed a prayer to become a Christian at some time in your life, or you may still be making that weekly trip to the altar just to make sure that you're still a believer, you're still saved, and you just go once a week just to make sure that your salvation is still secure. Well, if you are someone who fits into any of those categories, you might automatically assume, like I did, that you are living from Christ as your source, only to discover that it's possible for a Bible-believing Christian to still be living from the tree of death, of independence and separation. And so today I want to read a couple of extracts from a tiny little bomb of a book called Toxic Love by Malcolm Smith. And this seemingly innocent little book is given to anyone who is about to attend something called a cross encounter, which is very hard to explain with words what a cross encounter is or what it's like, because I've attended many conferences, seminars, events, training days, away days, weekends, but I'd never attended anything quite like a cross encounter. And my first one was back in April of 2023 in southwest Poland. And cross encounter is something that my mentor, my dear friend and co-worker Nancy McCready, was given by the Father as a way to bring the sons to the table. There you go. I've tried to give you a little bit, maybe 0.01% of it. And like anyone else, I was given this book, Toxic Love, to read before I got there. And not being a particularly long book, you can read it in one sitting if you're brave enough. And so not quite realizing what I was holding, I did just that. I looked at it and thought, oh, this won't take long. But it took me hours Now, I can't find my original copy, which says a lot, as I'm now onto my second copy. But in this original copy, I remember virtually every line being underlined with many, many parts highlighted and in huge red words that I'd written all the way through it. This is me. This is me. Because the exposure was brutal, and I seriously wondered if I even wanted to attend this cross encounter thing. But I'm telling you, when the Father is drawing sons to himself, there is an inner compelling of Holy Spirit that just won't go away. And I knew that this weekend was about to change the trajectory of my entire life, and it really, truly, honestly did. I sat motionless for several hours after I'd read this bomb of a book, as the truth landed pretty much like a Ryanair flight. And for those of you who aren't European, this is one of our low-cost airlines who have a reputation of slamming you into the runway when we land. So the dawning realization was that I had been living my whole life in complete toxicity. And with that I had never truly tasted the love of my Father. And this is what absolutely broke me. I'd never known the love of a father as a son in the way that I was reading about in this book, as I was reading about the love between the Father and the Son, Jesus. And I saw how I had used people to get my need for love met in the most vile of ways, putting expectations on people that they could never meet, because my need for love was created in me by my Father. It was part of my God-given design, and that he was the only one who could truly meet that need. And so at this point, I want to read two sections from Toxic Love to You. And if you don't have a copy of this book, there's an Amazon link in the description for today's episode. Costs about £8 in British money. And I strongly encourage you to get yourself a copy. And if you've read it once, read it again. And if you've read it 100 times, read it again. And so I'm going to start with a section called Created to be Loved. When God created man, he placed within him certain needs that he alone could fill. Knowing the Creator in a love union distinguishes the human from all other creatures. Here he finds the reason for his existence and his identity as a person. God's bestowed love is the fuel for every man. Severed from that love, he cannot function as the person God created him to be. The need for love could only be met by a relationship with God, who himself is love and the source of love in all his creation. Man's destiny in creation was, and still is, to live in union with love himself. Man's sense of significance and worth did not come from contemplating himself, but only as he looked to his origin and source, his Creator. His self-worth was bestowed upon him in God's unconditional love for him, a state of being which he enjoyed unearned and undeserved simply because he was alive and breathing. The lie. Into the garden paradise, the devil came and enticed man with the lie that was to shape the rest of human history. The lie, simply stated, said that to live in union with God, receiving and revealing his love in dependent faith and obedience, was not the only option open to mankind. Satan offered an alternative meaning to man's existence, one that had promised to shatter the myth that he was a mere dependent creature and bring him to the fullest potential of being a God independent of his Creator. To enter this life of total fulfillment demanded that he declare himself independent of the Creator, at which point he would discover vast resources of wisdom, power, and ability to live his life. Man believed the lie and, in declaring his independence, severed himself from God. No longer in vital union with him, but alongside of him, he acknowledged that God existed, but remained quite independent of him. In this condition, man lost his consciousness of being loved and therefore the source of his significance and value within the creation. Since the fall in the Garden of Eden, man has believed the lie, which is that in and of himself, he can be perfect, self-contained, self-sufficient, and totally in control of his destiny. He has reached the goal of being Superman, with a life that has meaning, joy, peace, and power, all independent of God. He tenaciously believes that one day he will achieve it all, and God will even let him into his heaven saying, "You did a good job without me." But man soon comes to the sickening realization that, however stubbornly he believes the lie, he is unable to make it work in his life. He does not have a life with meaning, joy, peace, and power. Instead, he suffers from the real guilt of sin and the lost consciousness of love and self-worth. Finally, there is shame, brought about by the knowledge that he cannot be the independent Superman the devil promised he could be. Where does he now turn for love and the sense of self-worth he knows he was made for? He turns to his fellow human beings. He looks to other creatures to give him the assurance that he is lovable, significant, important, and valuable. Understand the path he has chosen. It is doomed to failure from the start. If love originates in God alone, another creature cannot give man what his heart is craving. But worse, in choosing this path, man has placed a creature in the place reserved for God. He is an idolater with idols made of flesh, vainly believing that the idols will bring the answer to the emptiness within. Paul spoke of this in Romans 1:25, when he described the downward spiral of the human race. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator. So I wonder what you think about what you've just heard. Because when we said earlier that one tree produced death and the other produced life, that was exposed in me, how much death my life had been producing because the source was so wrong. So many of my relationships were marked by this toxicity where I was looking to people to find my value. And in these relationships, there was pressure, drama, constant drama, jealousies, conflicts, competitions. And sadly, that pattern had repeated itself across most of my life with so many different people and so many different contexts, too many for me to even sit here and tell you about. But all of that I thought was love because I had never known any different. I had never known the love of the Father. And this toxic counterfeit love is what love looks like from the wrong source, from the source that the devil deceived us into believing that we could become self-sufficient, independent people from God and live a good life. You see, just like in Isaiah chapter 6, where he sees his own condition, and then he sees the condition of everyone around him. The day I sat and read this book, I saw my own condition of how toxic my own relationships had been and were. And then I saw everyone around me was living in the same condition. The constant battles, rivalries, unrealistic expectations, the insecurity, the control, the manipulation, the comparison, the lies, the deceit, the cheating, all of it sourced from this broken system, which is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And once I saw this clearly from their perspective, from their point of view, I could no longer keep calling it love because it was so fake. What I had to come to the realization is that I had never truly known the love of the Father. This way of life that I was living had nothing in common with the life of the Godhead, the life shared between the three of them, which is marked by oneness, by a shared love and a shared life in unhindered giving. And this was the way of life that was set before humanity in the garden before we believed the lie. And in the garden, we chose the lie. We chose a different way of life, a source that produced separation and independence, instead of one that produced total dependency upon the Father, oneness, and total security that we, just because we breathe and we are alive, are loved with a love that is inexplicable. And what I finally recognized was that I'd been living from this other source as a believer because the fruit of it was everywhere. And this is why discipleship has got to be about becoming sons who wake up to this reality, who see that they have been living from the wrong source, from the wrong tree, trying to get validation and love from people rather than from the Father, trying to be good, trying to live right. And this discipleship process is about allowing Holy Spirit to begin to be the sole source of life to us in the Spirit. He's the one that brings to us the love of the Father. He's the one who reveals who we are as the new man. And he is the one who matures and grows us up in spirit as sons for the Father, who now bear the fruit of his life simply by changing the source. You see, when discipleship is reduced to serving and doing and becoming good, well-behaved Christians, we are still doing that sourced from the wrong tree. If there has been no exposure in us that we are still living independent, separated from the Father, trying to get our needs met independently from him. And so I think that's enough for today. I'll leave you with that, and I will see you next session for session 3 of Firm Foundation Lite.